Welcome to Voice of the Voiceless. This podcast is about vaginal birth after caesarean. Today I have two guests with me. I have Doula Sandy and I have Andrea, who's a mother who's actually experienced a VBAC, and they're both going to share some history on C-sections, what a VBAC is, and some VBAC stories. So to start with, Sandy.
Okay, her story of childbirth. In ancient times and for thousands of years, childbirth was revered and treated with respect. The woman was always supported during labour and birthing, either by other women or their partners. In ancient Greece, Hippocrates and Aristotle founded the school of medicine. Hippocrates believed that women needed support during childbirth. Aristotle wrote about the mind-body connection. Many years later, their writings were put into a book by Cyrannus of Ephesus in the 1st or 2nd century AD. Hippocrates and Aristotle had never mentioned pain as being a natural accompaniment to birthing. In the early centuries of the early AD, or ACE, Cyrannus' book was lost. It was thought to have been burnt during the burning times, a holocaust which lasted for 600 years throughout the Middle Ages, when healers and midwives were tortured, burnt at the stake or hung. So then many women were left to birth on their own, often in squalid conditions. This lack of hygiene created infections, which led to deaths, which created the fear regarding childbirth. Also in a translation of the Bible in Genesis it states that women will greatly multiply in sorrow when they'll bring forth children. This is known as the curse of Eve. The Church and its inquisitions at that time, during the Middle Ages, inherently believed that all women were evil, and especially midwives. They were considered the lowest of the low. Then in the 16th century, Cyrannus' book was rediscovered. It had not been burnt, but so much time had passed, and it was too late, and the community mindset was now that childbirth was to be feared. And this way of thinking has continued through until today. In the 16th century, King Louis XIV of France demanded that his mistress lay flat on her back to give birth, so that he could observe his child being born. It then became the fashion. Whatever royalty did was copied by others. From the French court, it went over to the English court. 30 years later, two Frenchmen invented the forceps to assist the births of women who were now laying flat on their backs to birth. It was the male servants who commenced the practice of clamping and cutting of the umbilical cord quickly in order to prevent blood on the bed linen, which they had to wash. Then, in the 19th century, Queen Victoria, in the Victorian era, she demanded to be given chloroform during childbirth because she said giving birth is not ladylike. So this made two very big changes to childbirth. This meant it went from home birth into the hospital, where it was considered the only safe place to administer a general anaesthetic. Now that childbirth was taking place in a hospital, it paved the way for other forms of pain relief. So in the 1930s, epidurals were introduced. Epidurals are a derivative of synthetic cocaine. In the 1950s, pethidine was introduced for pain relief. In the 1960s, 100 women giving birth, 2 of them would have a C-section. In the 1970s, the induction drugs for first, second, third stage labour were created.
Thanks, Sandy. I should mention as well that Andrea's brought her little baby along today, so if you heard any of his noises in the background, that's just him making his happy noises. So yeah, that history is very interesting, and I think it's good to start with that. It puts into context where caesarean sections come from and the history of the medicalisation of birth. So, Andrea, can you tell us a little bit about what a VBAC is?
Yeah, so a VBAC is basically having a vaginal birth after you've had a previous C-section or caesarean. It's one of the practices that should be encouraged perhaps more, because there are so many benefits that the mothers will experience, and also that the babies will experience. For the babies, they get a chance to be stimulated through the birth canal. They get a chance to build up that healthy microbiome. They have their lymphatic system stimulated. There are talks too of the fact that there might be imprinting when they're born of the experience, so it's considered to be less traumatic than having a C-section. So all of these things are really great for the babies, but for the mothers it also means that there's mental kind of benefits, and then there's physical benefits. So obviously having a C-section is quite a major surgery, a major abdominal surgery. If you have a C-section, you need to lay low for up to 12 weeks. It can take for some women to heal enough that they can even drive or they can pick up their babies. In the first few weeks, once you've had a C-section, you can't even pick up your baby easily without experiencing some sort of abdominal pain. So having a VBAC is a great benefit just for you being able to interact with your baby when it's born. It also has the benefit of making subsequent pregnancies that you might want to have safer, and also having further vaginal birth being safer down the track. So these are just some of the benefits that I can sort of think off the top of my head. I don't know if you can remember any others, Sandy?
Oh, I'm sure we'll come to it. But I just wanted to tell you a story the other day. I was talking to a 74-year-old lady, and she had 3 C-sections earlier in her life, and she was in a lot of pain that day. And I said, "Oh, what's the matter?" And she said, "Oh, it's my C-section scar." She said, "I'm off to the doctor later on, it's giving me trouble again." And I said, "And it still gives you trouble after all of this time?" "Yes, it flares up from time to time," she said. So that was interesting. You would think that once it had healed that it would never be creating a problem again, but for some people it does.
That actually reminds me of something that I was reading about with C-sections, is that you do create quite a large amount of scar tissue. And that scar tissue, depending on how you stimulate it and how you massage afterwards, you can actually end up with quite stiff scar tissue that can cause trouble. You can have pains later in life. You could have bladder issues where the scar tissue is built up around your bladder, and it means that all of those organs and body parts aren't able to function at their best, and so you end up later in life with more issues. Myself, I do experience some pain randomly with my scar. It doesn't seem to have any kind of particular time where it comes up, just randomly I might have little aches and pains. I have heard of other women when they've started their periods again, finding that they had a bit more discomfort, more symptoms, mainly because probably the movement and the contractions that are needed to stimulate the blood loss are probably not able to work as well. So yeah, it's important to sort of realise that those types of scar tissues will form. So trying to avoid a C-section in the first place is ideal. But if you do go for a VBAC, it just means that you're not adding to that. So if they give you a C-section after you've had a previous one, they're going to have to cut through that scar tissue again. Obviously, they'll if there's scar tissue there in the way, some of it might be removed depending on what's happening with your surgery. But obviously, you're going to form more scar tissue after that. So you're going to end up with a stiffer wound. You're going to end up with more around your bladder, more around those organs, which can lead to down the track problems. Some other issues that I think we should talk about with just cutting through your abdominal wall is the fact that you are cutting through a layer, quite a large amount of muscle tissue. So back pain, lower back pain is something that you might experience later in life if you don't really work hard to try and repair that damage. You even might experience in the beginning days the inability to lift properly because you aren't able to contract your core, you aren't able to start strengthening those abdominal walls early on. So it's at least 12 weeks before you're recommended to do any kind of exercise. And after that, if you've had abdominal surgery, really up to 6 months you could be waiting before you start to regain any kind of considerable strength. So so it's very important to make sure that those things are considered if you are going for sort of multiple C-sections, being aware of those types of things. Mm-hmm. Obviously, if you do a VBAC, you're reducing your problems for later in life for yourself, and it's also for your baby.
Mm. Can you tell us a little bit about the risks and the benefits of having a VBAC?
Yeah. Well, some of the benefits we just sort of talked about for the mothers and the babies, but I think I'll start with risks. Perhaps talking about the biggest one that was, told to me by almost every person that I saw when I was having my care. They are really concerned about uterine rupture. That's the big one that kind of comes up over and over again. Just to give a bit of a background on what a uterine rupture is, there's full and there's partial ruptures. So a full rupture is considered to be a rupture or a tear through the full thickness of the uterus, and fetal parts and or amniotic fluid escaping into the abdominal cavity. And a partial rupture is through the full thickness of the uterus, but there is a ballooning of the thin membrane around the uterus, so the membrane itself doesn't actually tear, and the fetal parts, amniotic fluid, don't escape into the abdominal cavity. Obviously, if you have a full rupture, that is serious and something that requires an emergency procedure to be done to help you out. And I'm not saying at any point that obstetric care is not important for avoiding those sorts of things, but one of the things that was mentioned to me quite often is how large the risk is for myself going for a VBAC. So I went and started looking into the statistics on this, and it's not as high as I was led to believe. So that's one of the biggest risk that comes up. Another risk they talk about is just your pelvis and everything not being able to move and stimulate the baby to move down as well, mainly because of things like weak abdominal muscles, scar tissue. So there's that kind of risk as well. But basically the biggest one that they talk about, and even in all the information I was given, is just the uterus rupture.
Yep.
So they do talk about some of the things that there are signs that you will be aware of if you are going to have a uterine rupture, but they talk quite a lot about how it's very difficult to detect if a uterine rupture is about to take place.
Okay.
And one of the ways that they can tell, or the only way that they can really tell, is apparently by using continuous fetal monitoring, which means that you depending on where you are basically given a belt that goes around your middle, and it's similar to a Doppler, but it's obviously much stronger, and they can keep an eye on the baby's heart rate. And if you are experiencing a uterine rupture, there's going to be changes that the baby will go through. Heart rate will go down, blood pressure for myself or the baby might change up or down depending on which part of the contraction or the surge that you're in. And so if they don't have that continuous monitoring, they say that they are unable to be certain when a rupture occurs. And if a rupture occurs and they don't detect it, then there is the risk that the baby can experience trauma and possibly even death. So that is the risk that they talk about, the biggest one.
And how big is this risk? I mean, how many women who have attempted a VBAC are likely to experience a uterine rupture? Yeah, so
the numbers that they gave me themselves is that the risk is only going to occur 1 in every 200 VBAC attempts. That's roughly about a 1% risk. So it's not as I said to you, it's not it is a serious risk if it does occur, but the percentage risk is still fairly low, that it's, I think in my mind, worth giving a VBAC a go. I think not be fearful of it, give it a go. They are going to be able to monitor you if you wish to have the monitoring done, so that you can avoid serious problems. So if you do the VBAC, I think the benefits will far outweigh the risks.
Yep. And I've just got a quote here from a study on the risk of uterine rupture in Australian women attempting vaginal birth after one prior caesarean section. And part of the results, it says, compared with spontaneous labour, risks were increased 3 to 5-fold for any induction, 6-fold for prostaglandin combined with oxytocin, and 14-fold for augmentation with oxytocin. So I just thought I'd add that with induction